Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jide Olusoya. I'm joining you from London, and I'll be your host for this conversation. I'm a director, writer, and photographer raised between Nigeria and London, so this discussion is extra special to me, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. Just a quick word about the festival. Africa in Motion is an annual African film festival that takes place in Scotland, consisting of film screenings and events around those screenings as well. Now in its 16th year, African Motion has established itself as a major annual event within the Scottish cultural calendar, whilst also maintaining an international profile as one of the leading African film platforms. We're pleased to be screening the film When a Farm Goes Aflame, a tale about Jide's mother and brothers from other mothers. A sort of in-depth, man, there's so many words for this film, I'll be very honest with you. But we're going to get into the meat of it. But I'm going to introduce our guest, Jide Akinleminu, who's the director of the film. So Jide grew up in the town of Ikorodu, Nigeria, a son of a Nigerian farmer and a Danish librarian. His family relocated to Denmark in 1991, where he studied music and sound engineering and then photography. He attended the acclaimed FATAMORGANA, Danish School of Photography, completed several documentary projects and exhibitions, and started working with documentary film at a local television station before moving to Berlin in 2004 to attend cinematography studies at the German Film and Television Academy in Berlin. So far, it's already an impressive resume and portfolio. His debut as a director, Portrait of a Lone Farmer, won African Movie Academy Award in 2014 for Best Documentary, amongst other awards, and his second feature-length documentary, When a Farm Goes Aflame, premiered at the Berlinale 2021 and is currently touring the festival circuit. Welcome, Jide. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Jolade. I'm good. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Amazing. Thanks for being here. So I've never really done this before. This is my first time hosting a conversation. Usually I'm behind the camera. I'm not really seen, but when I saw this film, I was more than happy to jump into this conversation with you about this triggering, complex, and yet beautiful piece of work that you've crafted here over years of labor. And I kind of want to go into, for the next 40 minutes, so we're going to go into a dissection of the film through some questions, and I look forward to hear your responses. It's more going to be a conversation than it is a sort of Q&A, because that's how I like to operate things. The first thing that jumped out to me, actually, I can't say it's the first thing. I think that by the end of it, it became the theme that stuck out to me, and it was the sins of the father. And yeah. I wanted to know if that was intentional, if that was kind of the theme you wanted to start out with, or is it something that became apparent to you throughout?
It's a very good summary somehow. The sins of the father, or shall we say, the sins of man, and even using the word sins might be a bit judgmental, but yeah, it was very clear to me, even though my intention was to make a portrait of a female character, of the mother character. Obviously, I knew that a big part of it will also be about male shortcoming somehow, and so yes, it was my intention to tell a story about fatherly shortcoming, male shortcoming, and I wouldn't necessarily say sins, because things happen and nobody's perfect, but there's something like when communication fails, when you fail to take responsibility for your actions and be open about the things that have happened and the things that you have done, not necessarily things that you did, but if something happened and in your presence and you were part of it, you have to acknowledge your part in whatever happened. You don't have to take blame, or you don't have to to be the facilitator behind whatever happened, but you had a role in it, and that this needs to be acknowledged. So yes, I guess one major quest of this film was to try to make the man responsible for his actions, or have him acknowledge his part in the story. But not only the man, like I guess I'm asking everyone to try to figure out their position in the story. And in the way I'm doing it, I'm trying to not let people talk about whose fault is what or who did what, but just acknowledge their own position in the story by either doing something or not doing something, but acknowledge that they either did or didn't.
Yeah, I like that, and it didn't feel like you were really gunning for your father. If anything, it was sort of a forensic investigation into the why. Which I can really appreciate, especially from a cultural standpoint, in terms of why our men or fathers are the way that they are. It's sometimes mind-boggling. And for me, you answered a lot of questions for me personally in that film. I was all like, yeah, okay, I see it now. I get this. I understand this. But even going further into the context of how men deal with a situation like this, or how they get there, do you feel like masculinity was a huge part of the storytelling? And in that, how did that affect your approach, and your own personal journey in this as well as a man? Strictly speaking, caught in the middle of this.
Yeah, for me, it was a personal process, I guess, and first of all, trying to understand other people's stories, but also constantly regarding my own story, reviewing my own story, and my own process in terms of relationships, in terms of being a man, being a brother, being a son. I try to be aware of my part in the things, and in the relationships, and masculinity was definitely a big theme. What was interesting to me was to see like why in my father's case, or even in my brother's case, why was something so difficult to talk about, and why did it feel like masculinity was broken if they admitted, in my father's case, to be precise, if my father admitted to some wrongdoing, or to have some affairs on the side, or whatever, if he admitted certain things or admitted certain thoughts, does that mean that he failed as a man in his culture? So that definitely something that the film is trying to look at and to challenge, is this question of masculinity. Why was it so important for my Nigerian father to maintain this illusion towards my mom? Wouldn't it have been a stronger thing, a more manly thing, to just tell the truth that I come from this culture where these things happen, and I also love you and I do want to be with you, but this is happening right now, and yeah, what do you say about that?
Yeah.
To me, that would be like the manly thing to do, the masculine thing to do. But apparently there seems to be some kind of conflict in that situation. So that is what the film is trying to bring to discussion, like how do and in bringing in my younger half brother, I'm trying to bring that question out to this generation, to our generation, to the younger generation, for them to consider what does it mean to be a man, because yourself, myself, my younger Nigerian brother, we travel, we are able to, like, we are Nigerian, but we are also around the world, so we know different cultures, we know different ways of relating. Yeah, are there any conflicts in that, or are there any contradictions in our roles as men in the different parts of the world?
Yeah.
So those are things that I'm hoping, that I was wanting this film to touch on.
Oh, you were, and I think for me, one thing I was aware of was the diversity in terms of opinion of what masculinity looks like. So obviously you've got some would say, especially Yoruba men, that they're very stubborn, very, very stubborn men. And there's definitely an Afrocentric version of masculinity and a Western version. And the Western version sounds more like what you were speaking about being vulnerable and opening up about
Mm,
those things. But
mm,
whereas African vulnerability seems to be more of a don't ask questions, it is what it is.
mm,
We don't talk about that,
mm,
or if my word is final. And I did see that throughout the film, and
mm,
it kind of even ties into your relationship with your mother, which I found very, very interesting because I think the years from where I was sitting watching this film, the years in Nigeria definitely formed a lot of her personality. And I saw in her demeanor towards you when you would ask questions, she was quick to try and beat you to the punch in a
mhm,
way.
mhm,
Not quite not wanting to answer, but almost wanting to get it over with in a
mhm,
way. And what some could say that it was painful for her to relive those situations. And I know you were aware of that. So
mm.
in a way, I'm kind of curious as to one, um, how did you navigate that personality of your mother in terms of that brashness in a way? But also, how did you navigate your personal relationship with her in that moment of, okay, how do I approach her? Do I be soft or be kind or do I push? Because it sounded like you wanted to know,
Mhm.
but also maybe you wanted her to finally verbalize some things.
Yeah.
And you were still also very cautious of the fragility
Mhm.
of her and the situation. How did you navigate all of that? Especially with your mother.
Yeah, that was one of the main challenges for me. Like I didn't want to force her to. I didn't want to push her into the pain again. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go to a space if she to the space of the trauma if she did not want to visit that space. So I was very cautious of how I was asking and what I was asking for. So that's why the process was very slow. So it was a very long process of conversations, um, and I didn't want to just sit her down and just go straight to whatever was on my mind. Um, I would try to set a tone. For example, the filming began, or I tried to use the fact that she was going through her old letters and digitizing them, typing them on the laptop. I tried to use that activity as a framework for talking about the past, so that it wouldn't be me coming to get something out of her, but I was there and we were talking about these things. And if it came to her if she had a specific memory or she felt like sharing something with me, I would capture that. But from a filmmaking perspective, that was a very, very slow process. So
Mm,
at some point, I felt I had to speed it up a bit.
mm,
But I was still very aware of not forcing her to talk about something that
mm,
she didn't feel like. So all these conversations are based on things happening in the moment. For example, a phone call just happened and we talk about that,
mm,
or or she received a letter from somewhere, then we talk about that. Um, and and if I seem pushy and trying to get something specific out of her, then it's on one point because I feel that she's not being clear,
mm,
and maybe on another level, um, I'm, I might have been overstepping on some level because I'm trying to get her to say things so that she can hear that herself, so that she can say, "Yes, I was disappointed," because um, I felt it's a process that's necessary for everyone involved to just
mm,
acknowledge their feelings, good or bad. And I felt that part of this entire problem was because people were not acknowledging their feelings. My dad was not acknowledging his fear or his passion or whatever it was. He was not acknowledging it. He was not allowing it to be obvious. And my
mm,
mom was not acknowledging her disappointment by his absence or whatever. So 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 in some of these conversations, I might seem a bit pushy, but the intention is just to try to get the character to acknowledge in his or her own words the feeling, the emotion, instead of avoiding speaking about the emotion.
mm. In a way, it kind of ties into the notion of film as therapy, in a way. And maybe this process was intended as that for you and everyone else involved. I noticed that with the the last sibling that you showed in the film, the older one, or roughly a couple of weeks older than you, he seemed to be more willing to divulge, and that stemmed from the pain he had suffered of that relationship. And what I would argue, there's a yearning in him to still connect because of the rejection that you guys, and I say you and your other siblings, probably didn't experience to a certain degree. There was definitely rejection across the board if you think about the fact that multiple families were started, but compared to that first sibling who was literally told, stay away, he seemed to yearn more, which is interesting because there seemed to be a rejection from others who had that relationship, and there was a desire from him who didn't have that relationship. So I wonder if this film became therapeutic for people involved beyond yourself. Would you say that's the case?
I would say that I, in a way, intended to invite my members of the family to work on this with me. Like, it was an invitation, and it was an opportunity. I saw it as an opportunity. I knew that nobody needed a film to be made. Nobody needed to work like that, and that's my thing. But still, it's a thing, and I'm inviting you to participate. So I did feel that it was an opportunity for my mom, my brother, my father also to try to air some things, and it was an opportunity off camera and on camera. Like, it wasn't an opportunity that was exclusive to the camera. So yeah, and it's interesting that you sense this thing about the sibling in Los Angeles, because I had the same impression that he was somehow the only one that seemed to be willing to share openly, at an intimate level, at least. And yes, and I can only imagine that it's tied to a life, a life full of rejection, and finally someone is there acknowledging the story, acknowledging his presence and his backstory. Me listening to it is acknowledging it. So I imagine that is validation, and that's a relief for him. Whereas the rest of us are maybe just confused, because we do have versions of our family stories. We do have versions of our relationship to our father, and some things are just confusing, and it might be too painful to revisit. In the case of my younger half brother, he might have. I don't want to speak for him, but I can imagine that he also has a level of disappointment, and he chooses to just not deal with it and move on with life, which is also perfectly fair to just choose to do so.
Of course.
Which is ultimately the conclusion I reach also, even though I'm older than him, and I'm the son, I'm the brother, I've been around all these places. Ultimately, I think my character in the film also comes to this conclusion to just let it be somehow.
I did get that from the ending, especially the way it ended. It and I was very transfixed on that ending shot, by the way. And in fact, you repeat that kind of shot a few times across the film. And I'm interested because me as a photographer as well, I tend to try and emulate still photography in my visuals, in terms of how can a wide shot or even a close-up just be and let it do its own thing, whether it's in terms of the scenery or the subject. And I'm curious, how much of your photography background came into your production process of this film? Was it intentional? How much of it was experimental? How much of it was storyboarded in a way? And it's documentary, which, you can never really always storyboard a thing. But how much of your photography process came into this?
Well, as a filmmaker, it's my background as a photographer definitely completely influenced my filmmaking approach. I mean, even though I went to a film school and trained to be a cinematographer, where you work in a team with the director and you storyboard and you plan the shots, you work with lights, Ultimately, the films I'm doing as a director for myself are like a one-man band films. I'm holding the camera in my hand as if I was doing a photography session, you know. I just learned to put the camera on a tripod and to let it roll for a while. Instead of thinking in snapshots, instead of thinking in moments, you think in time. So the way of working is very much like a documentary photographer. I go out with my camera. Obviously, it's a bit more equipment. There's also sound. I have sound equipment. I have my tripod, so I'm carrying more load. But I still set out by myself and move around flexibly. I don't know what impression one gets from this film. It might seem pretty close. It's just like family members all the time. But in the process of filming, I do go out a lot. Also, I go out to locations and to groups that are not directly connected to the main story. So there's a lot of constant research happening, constant questioning, not just by the main protagonist, but also in their surroundings. You sense it a bit with my half brother in Canada. I filmed a lot at his university, and all his activities. I was just documenting all aspects of it. And with my dad and his poultry, and with my mom, the things she does in Copenhagen, I document all aspects of their daily life. Just as a photographer going around snapping pictures. So that definitely influenced. And then at the end, when like as in documentary photography, at the end you have like your 20 rolls of film, and for each roll of film there's one shot that's interesting, and then you select, maybe you end up with a series of 5 pictures that you present. And documentary filmmaking is the same to me. Like you collected all this footage, or I collect all this footage, and then I start lining it up in the computers, in timelines, and then you end up with this very, very, very precise and precise selection to tell the story.
So in that case, your post-production process, was it something that, I read somewhere in a book a while ago, years ago, that an edit is a second chance to direct your film, which I inherently agree with. And I wish I'd known that sooner when I started out in this industry, so I wouldn't be so hard on myself, in the edit. But would you say that's something you took on willingly, in terms of realizing that, okay, cool, this is going to go this way now, because maybe what I imagined wasn't going to happen? And I asked that question because, again, because of the emotional investment in this story, this discovery. Were you more tied to the idea that things had to go chronologically, or did you separate yourself at some point from that connection to say, for the merit of the film, it needs to go in this way instead? Was there that fight in yourself between the creative worth of the thing and then the emotional worth of the thing that required a certain structure?
I absolutely agree that especially in documentary filmmaking, that you, to some extent, you create the film in the edits. In this case, with this film, the shooting, the production was over a couple of years, and before I started shooting, I had a vague idea for a structure of which things I would film, that I felt if I had these things, I could edit a film out of it. So I made a rough plan, but life happens as it does. Things don't turn out the way, and then, chain of events, and everything turned out to be different. Like once I started filming, the entire plan I made fell apart because things happened differently. And because of the emotional tension of everything, and we're talking about several characters in different countries at different stages in their lives, looking for different things. So everything was quite somehow fragile. I never really knew how long this character would be available to talk about these things. How long am I willing to bother this character with this topic? What will happen if this? So everything was quite fragile. So I never really knew how far I could go and what I would get. And then part of the story, I'm supposing the people who see this Q&A now have already seen the film, so I can talk about things that happened in the film. For example, the cancer, my mom's cancer, that nearly there were several things that happened that made me almost stop filming and stop making the film, and that was one of the biggest obstructions. That at that point I almost gave up entirely. So gathering the footage, producing the film, filming the story, I never really knew exactly where it would go. And my mom got cancer. We didn't know where that would go. Luckily, it went well. She was cured, and then these things with my dad happened. He suddenly decided to disown me. That came a bit out of the blue. So in collecting the footage, I never really knew how the story would end, where it would go. So it was, and at some point I just decided, now I'm going to stop filming, like, because this is somehow a never-ending story. So I decided, I made a rational choice to stop filming, and from that moment is when I started creating the story in the edit. And I knew obviously it was going to be a story that didn't really have a clear solution. Like I had a lot of questions. But there will be no definitive conclusion or solution to all of these questions. So I knew it was going to be a film about the searching and trying to understand some things that in this framing maybe did not were never solved, and maybe cannot be solved for future generations. I don't know. I think a lot of these issues with there's a lot of post-colonial relationship tension going on. Also in this film is told from a family perspective, love story perspective. It's a divorce story, but I think it translates also to political levels, and it also translates to a lot of the political work we still have to do between Africa and Europe, the colonizers.
I agree. I completely agree. I did see those undertones there and commentary on what was going on in Nigeria in the 80s and the 90s. And that's a conversation for a whole nother day because it gets expansive. But I did see that, and I could see how that also informed the relationship between your mother and your dad's family, and then imagine what the home situation must have been like as well, and then coming back to Europe as well. It must have been one hell of a transitory journey for you, and that's something I noticed in this film. It's very mobile. It's a very mobile film. It jumps all over the place visually, not only just in terms of timelines and stuff, but visually it jumps, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the from the water to the sky, from the sky to the land. It was I think for me a sort of you're trying to convey to the audience that this thing took mileage. It wasn't a thing of interviews on the phone. I went to discover, I went to ask, which is, especially over the course of the amount of time you spent filming this, I think is really incredible, and a lot of labor, putting yourself through that, because this wasn't a commissioned film from my understanding. You put yourself through this, and I wondered how much of that was taxing for you, and what, because at some point some people say, okay, cool, I've got a half brother, all right, cool, and as someone who can relate to that experience, it's like, okay, it's done. I'm never gonna get an answer, and do I necessarily care? But you decided to take all those trips, and I also want to know, tying into this thing of the camera in people's faces, because as a photographer, we know that when we're doing street photography or documentary photography, we have to develop a sixth kind of sense around what people know what doing, or how to get the shot and keep it moving, whether it's hoping the shutter doesn't go off loud or whatever, or just being in the right place at the right time. You had a camera in people's faces for long periods of silence, and I wondered, how did you deal with that? And did anyone say, get that damn camera out of my face? Or how did you even talk to people to prepare them for that, especially in the cases of your half brothers? So the brother that you went to see in Canada, I noticed that when you were in the car and you panned left towards him, I could see in his face, but he didn't say anything. How did you deal with that across the filming? I found it really incredible, because I was sat watching these shots for however long they went, thinking this has to be uncomfortable for the people in front of the camera. Why didn't they say anything? How did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's a verbal agreement. There's like I don't just show up with the camera and put it in the faces. There's preparation and there's agreement, and then so there's consent all over the board, and when there's no consent, and if people say no, then I switch off. So in my family, so for example, the opening scene of my first film, Portrait of a Blonde Farmer, that's exactly this situation. And those are the first attempts of me trying to interview my parents about their marriage. This is many years ago. And I'm filming them with a little DV camera. And I'm saying, and I'm talking about, like, I have some questions about their marriage and blah, blah, blah. And then my dad gets emotional. My mom asks me to turn off the camera, but I refuse. I say, no, this is important. And then she says, well, can't you see that it's hurting your dad? And I'm saying, yes, but it's hurting me too. So that moment, I refused to turn off the camera. Like but after that moment, there was something happened in our relationship. So I did have to put the camera away for a while, and it took me a number of years before I felt comfortable filming with my parents again. But since then, there has been no issue because since then I understood the boundaries, and they also learned to to express how to say enough is enough. So within my family, I feel that we learned how to like, I'm allowed to film, and I understand when not to film. For making this film, everybody was asked beforehand, and I first asked my mom, is she willing to participate in a new film project as the main character? That means she would be the main character, because in my previous film, my dad was the main character. And she agreed, knowing that it would be probably, there will be some hard moments, and there'll be some, and she also had some demands. She said that there are certain situations where she would insist that I turn off the camera, and I agreed to that. So with my half brother, he had his level of like, he agreed to everything, and he had me there. He wanted to have me there, but then he chose to remain private once I was there. He chose to remain closed. So that was something that I had to deal with the camera. So obviously there's a lot of silence in those scenes. There's a lot of maybe tension. But yeah, otherwise, and then I just decided to go along with it. If people know I'm there, people know I'm filming, people know what the camera can do, because they knew the effect of my first film. They knew that it came out, it went to festivals. So it's, once they've allowed me to be there with the camera, then that's basically it. They choose to share what they want to share, and I'm not going to try to force anything out of them. You can say with my dad, he knew very well that I was filming. We had a talk off camera, and we had a talk on camera. And the talk off camera enabled us to vent anything that needed to be vented that shouldn't be on camera. And then we had the talk on camera, and he chose to be very defensive, and he chose to be very close, and I did not dismantle that. I tried to ask different versions. I tried to find ways, but ultimately I failed, and it is what it is. Like, I allowed that to be like that. So yeah, I felt that even though it seems as if there's tension and there's a lot of rejection, it also displays how willing and ready the people are to deal with these emotional topics, and that tells a story in itself.
So in that regard, would you say that you had to employ a sort of journalistic nuance to this, or approach to this? Did you have to research into journalistic approaches? Did you have to maybe watch other documentaries that kind of would show a different way of getting around blockades, whether it's emotional or people, or was it purely just a sort of I'm gonna wing it in a way, because it was your family.
Yeah, no, I didn't have any film references, but I did do a lot of thinking and talking also about communication, how to communicate non-violently. I did some research on that. I did some workshops and things like that. So I tried to utilize the new language I had learned for myself. I tried to utilize that in speaking to my family members.
That's good. I like that. I like that. I think it shows a sort of intuition, and but also a bravery towards family, especially from a Nigerian background. Because again, I can only speak from my experiences as a Nigerian. It's a thing where family is one of the hardest nuts to crack, in terms of uncovering histories. And you would think the family would be the first place you learn a lot more, but you'd be surprised how many things are hidden because of the pain or whatever. So this film was kind of a masterclass for me in terms of you can go deeper, you can ask the questions, and film is a really great way of doing that, which you would never believe. And I'm still in awe about the fact that you got your family to divulge what they divulged on camera, and even going to the camera element of things. I used to study, or I didn't study, but I trained as a DP in many ways and through freelance work. And I was struck by the camera quality and the use of it. So there'll be times when you're in a bus in Nigeria and the camera's not shaking. Now, what mount did he use here? How is the footage not shaking? And I wanted to know how much of your research went into the right gear for the scenarios you would be in, because if you're traveling by yourself with all this gear, you're somewhat either traveling really heavy or really light. And I wanted to know the process around the pre-production and production that would help you decide what you were going to use for this documentary.
Yes, I was traveling as light as possible, and a lot of my footage is very shaky, and it suffers a lot from being a one-man band. But because I shot a lot and I had many attempts, I was able to select some sections that seemed to be technically okay. But between these moments, there's a lot of technically bad stuff also. So I mean, in the case of like the driving shots, for some reason that just turned out to be a theme in both films, Portrait of a Lone Farmer and When a Farm Goes Aflame. Driving from my dad's house to his farm, that was a lot of time we spent together driving back and forth. So I did a lot of shots like that, panning from the road to his face, back and forth. So I used that also when I went to see my brother in Canada and Bumi in LA. I also tried to use the same camera language, with the traveling and somebody steering and the panning to the face, and because we all have very concentrated faces somehow. And so yes, there's a lot of this kind of footage, and then you just select the one that somehow works best. And often, it will suffer from the conditions, because I don't have the most expensive or best, but I have what I felt was good enough and what I managed for the circumstances.
I know, for sure. I think you definitely more than managed. I think you delivered a pristine product, in my opinion, and again, adding on to the whole thing of the use of equipment and how it was filmed, you feature yourself in this in interesting ways, and I wonder how much of that was intentional too. And obviously there's you at the table with your mother, eating meals. There's a shot that I love so much of you. I think you're sat outside your father's house. It's nighttime. You're sat on this bench, and I think he sat in front of you in the dark, and you're just there. It's a beautiful shot. And there was another shot of you where I think your mother was lying down in bed, and you had the tripod and the camera. And I was curious, were those intentional shots? Were you always trying to feature yourself in that way, beyond just the voice behind the camera, or was that let me just see how it works?
Yeah, let me just see how it works. I mean, obviously, I knew that as aesthetically or creatively as a filmmaker, I would rather not be in it. I would rather like reduce my role in it as much as possible. But I knew from the first film already, because it was a very personal, subjective, and very personal storytelling, that it was helpful for the audience to somehow have me in there somehow, one way or another. So in the
Mm.
first film I had a bit of voiceover, and I was visible in one shot, but also often you hear my voice from behind the camera. And in this film, I try to make this film without any voiceover at all, knowing that my voice from behind the camera would be enough presence.
Mm.
And also, I think you mostly see me with my mom at this lunch table or dinner table.
Mm.
I don't know. It's just, spending a lot of time. Sometimes I film conversations. Sometimes I film when she's doing something or nothing, and then sometimes I film the two of us. So it's just the activity. It's just me doing what I do, filming stuff,
Mm.
playing with the time that I'm spending with either my mom or my dad or my half brother. With my half brother, I did some things also with myself in it. So just roughly, as a filmmaker, I did not try to hide myself or disguise that I was the one making the film. It was important to show that I was a son, or I am a
Mm.
son and a brother and a filmmaker, but also not overtell it, not make it larger than that. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't want to make it more of a me. I'm doing this. So you have the opening scene where I very briefly have a few questions, and then that's it. Then the rest of the film is kind of like navigating through these initial questions.
Mm. Okay. Thank you for that. What are you trying to do at the core of this journey? What were you trying to achieve? And I guess I'm asking that in regards to your development as a filmmaker and maybe the general landscape of film. Because I look at your background in film and I'm looking at what you're creating now. And there's nothing wrong with personal work. I love personal work. For me, that's where the art is born from. And I'm seeing a lot of films come out these days born from personal stories, which I'm all for, especially when it comes to our people, Black people. There is so much richness, pain for sure, but the fact that we're telling the stories is, it seems to me that we're just trying to heal from it and then find the fresh stories to tell that come from a place of joy and progression. So I guess in looking at the general landscape of film from your perspective, is this film trying to do anything about that landscape? Is it trying to challenge anything about filmmaking from your perspective as a Nigerian and a Danish man as well? Is there something you're trying to say and do? I'm curious.
Yes, I'm trying to present this identity from between, like the double identity, or the possibility of being in between these conflicts, and but not experiencing it as a conflict, rather as as a norm, or as something that can be dealt with. The Danish identity, the Nigerian identity. Um, if you talk about culture clashes, if you claim that that's the problem in this case between my parents that led to the divorce, if you claim that that's culture clashes, then I'll claim to be from both cultures, and I'll have to manage this clash. So 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 that's something I think this film can bring to the table, to discuss about normalizing having these two cultures, and not having it be a conflict, but having it be something that can be talked about and dealt with. Or in the case of my half brother in Canada, I feel that he's from a very I feel that representation of Nigerian youth is kind of lacking in what we see in the media. We have music videos, we have Netflix, we have the Nollywood luxury world. I feel that there's lack of representation of just normal, average Nigerian youth. So I felt also that this film could have, it in the edit, it ended up focusing more on the mother character, but in the making of the film, that was also part of my intention to create a space where a contemporary normal Nigerian youth, and the thoughts they have, the situation they're in, able to travel, maybe not wanting to go back to Nigeria the way our fathers, they traveled abroad, knowing and wanting to come back to Nigeria to rebuild the country in the 70s. I don't know, with my brother's generation now, do they intend to come back to Nigeria, or are they gone forever? So I felt that this film could also contribute to these topics, to these discussions.
Definitely.
But from a film perspective, I don't think that the film. I mean, the way the story is told in these blocks and this floating, that might be somehow interesting, but I don't think it's. I think it's fairly traditionally told. It's as a film, it's not doing anything that's spectacular.
I think they've been very humble, in my opinion, because for me, in terms of my experience of documentary and watching documentaries, this is, first of all, it's a very fresh story. One that is an old story in the sense that from our cultures and maybe even Black community, more so, because we hear about it more from our part of the world. We know this thing happens a lot, but it's not something we've ever seen investigated to this degree or ever. So I feel like for me, it's shifting the degree to which one can tell a story about something. Like what are we not talking about? Can we make a story about this? And can it stem from a personal place? So for me, watching it, you've definitely lit a fire, and I think a lot of filmmakers who watch this, especially from my background, will take this on as like, okay, cool, this is something we can do now. Let's start talking about these things, whether it's from the insidious nature of our communities back home, from governments and all these things, because it starts, what they say, charity starts at home. So you start with a home story, and then it becomes from a micro level, then it becomes macro. So I think you've definitely done something here that's really making me think about stories that I want to tell and wonder, okay, what can I do now, and how daring would it be? So I can appreciate your hard work in that regard, but also your opinions, in that you feel like you're not really shifting anything. But I personally think that you are. I know that we are close to running out of time, but I guess I wanted to know if you had any further comments on what you're trying to do next for the film. Is there like another stage to the story, or is there, I don't know, what's the next? It sounds like a very basic question, but I am genuinely interested because of the way this film ended. I'm curious. What next? What's next for you?
In terms of filmmaking, I think I'm done for now with the personal things, or at least with my family. I don't think I would. I don't see this as a trilogy. Like this was like 2 films, and then and the next film, I hope to develop something that's a bit more fictional and a bit more playful, and it will hopefully still have Nigerian roots, parts of the story, but it will also travel. It'll be from different parts of the world. I can't really say much about it because I'm still kind of brainstorming and developing, but it is going to be something about searching for truth, but more on a fictional and playful level.
I think that would be amazing to see. I was really curious about your upbringing in Nigeria, because whenever I think of mine, for the rough 7, 8 years that I was there as a kid, it was in some parts colorful, in some parts hell, and I'm like, how many of us again went through a similar kind of thing, and what are the stories that could be amazing, that should be told? And I wonder if a part of you is even curious about retelling that story in a somewhat fictional way, or if and maybe even a documentary way, if that's ever crossed your mind at all. I don't know, but that's something that I'll leave to you to decide if you ever want to do that. But I'll be here waiting and ready the minute you decide to do that. I think that's all we have time for at this moment in time, but I want to say a huge thank you to you, Jide, for sharing your amazing work and sharing in this conversation. I've learned so much. I'm sure that people, when they watch this, will be further intrigued to check out more of your work and be educated in terms of how far a filmmaker can go and what our truth can do for us, and our wider community as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really do look forward to seeing more of your work. And to those watching, Thank you for joining us as well. Sign up to Africa Emotions newsletter to keep up with their events and follow them on social media using AIM Film Fest or hashtag AIM Film Fest as well. Thanks for watching.
Thanks so much. Thank you.